Tom, Ed, thank you for this invite. I certainly feel it's a huge privilege to be here after listening to many of the stories over the last day and a half. It's interesting to me every time I come to one of these events just how different our missions are, but how common our problems are and our challenges. And I think that's the case here. So any good defense agency kind of starts from our defense strategy, right? And you've heard it. We're shifting. We're going from what once was a dedicated focus to elimination of terrorism to an area of returning back to the great power competition. So why did I start here? Well, I had dinner with a colleague who was in the White House and the author of the National Cyber Defense Strategy, who told me, you know, the biggest thing we got to realize is this is not a problem of the federal or the Defense Department. This is an us problem. So if you look at just a quick Google search when I was writing this brief, you find that these issues transcend just about every area of our industry, of our global economy. And he said it's an us problem because our adversaries can get through you, me, but they're going to have a hard time getting through us collectively if we work together. So that's what we have to do, and that's kind of what led to the creation of our agency. You look at some recent guidelines that have come out that says you got to get after this problem. You heard it yesterday. General Hyten from Greg. Our DoD CIO says you got to modernize. You got to really fix the infrastructure so that we can get after this AI stuff. We have in the intelligence community additional guidance telling us you really need to think about sharing this information. It will help. And they both focus on how do you get AI as a force enabler. So that's what we've been looking at. We've been on this journey I came to the agency in 2018. I'll tell you a little bit about the story of the agency because I think it's important to set the stage of the chaos we were dealing with at that time. DCSA, Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency, the name was born in 2019. Prior to that, it was an agency of less than 1,000 people, both civilian employees and our industry partners, total. At the flip of a switch, the letter from the government, we went to 14,000 people overnight. 7 components from across the federal government and DoD came together to create the largest security-focused entity in the federal government organization. Security is a strange thing. It sits between several different missions of the Department of Defense. We're not the IC, but we do work very closely, and we have components that are very IC-like, meaning the intelligence community. We're not warfighting. We're not in the command and control business. We sit in between. We help them to execute their mission. Personnel security and industrial security. Personnel security, you may have heard of the names Snowden, Manning, Hassan. While we don't measure ourselves necessarily in net profit, we measure ourselves by those failures. We can't have that. Personnel security mission was one of the big ones that we pulled out of the Office of Personnel Management. If you may remember back, it was referred to earlier, 2015. Our adversaries downloaded some of the largest hack in the federal government in history. There was a lot of our personal information, a lot of close information that we protected and took very dear in doing background investigations for security clearances across the federal government. Industrial security. If you work with the federal government in a classified mission, doing classified work under a contract, having your own classified facilities or networks, you come through our agency. The security threat and security training really cross both mission sets. That's where we look at counterintelligence activities, we look for insider threat, we train most of the federal government background investigators across the US that do that work, that go out and knock on doors and get that information. And we also have the polygraph, think of the lie detector. Those missions all fall within DCSA. We're in the risk calculation business, that's what we do. We assess risk. Great opportunity for everything we've been talking about for the last day and a half. So we kind of stepped back and said, hey, if we need to do AI, what's out there? What can we use? Jokingly, I don't have a marketing department. That's one of the other big differences between many of you. So bear with me. You can laugh at my slides. But we did look back and say, what's out there? You know, ELIZA's funny. It's when I started my graduate work, you know, ELIZA was pretty popular. We were learning a lot about natural language processing, natural language generation in the mid-90s. What about Siri? Can that help us with national security? Not really. So how do I motivate this workforce? 7 different components, 7 cultures, no real processes to talk about, no real sets of data to talk about, and I'll get into that a little bit more. How am I going to get them all in one vision that we need to really get after AI? We need a Starship Enterprise. No kidding. We need something that complex, that reliable, that effective, that we can go brave new places and really solve this problem. Well, how do you get there? Well, Gall's law tells us start simple. The best complex systems are assembled from simple things that work. You've heard that message throughout the 2 days here. So for us, simple, our biggest roadblock was data. And I'm going to share with you in a minute where the data lives and how it lives. But we need good data. That's our business. It's integral to everything we're going to do, let alone applying everything we're talking about here with AI and machine learning. So the old way. I came in this business 2018. The first place I went was Pennsylvania, the western side in the mountains. You may have heard of the limestone mines that are being used to store data, or the National Archives, art archives of some of the wealthy people of the world. OPM also has several mine shafts there with a lot of paper. So my first vision when I walked in the doors and opened up this mile-long mine shaft, and mind you, they had 4 of them, was like Indiana Jones. It was, as far as the eye could see, metal shells with manila folders on it. And somebody in a little metal cart, looking like a grocery cart, walking down the aisle, pulling random files, what I thought was random, off the shelf, to walk them into another part of the shaft where people were sitting at green screens, hand typing data. So an incident or a case starts our process. Humans review, triage, and assign tasks to people to go get more information. We have to look at the old data. It's part of the law, part of the process. But we need to find new information out to corroborate, has something changed? We append that information, we conduct some assessments, and that takes months, years. When I first came in 2018, the process was taking over a year for a top secret clearance. That's not acceptable. We can't do that. So we knew we had to get to this kind of a process where artificial intelligence could help us identify the anomalies and patterns in the data, and in fact allow us to reverse the process. Let's not look at that old data in paper. Let's look at the data we've amassed in the database, run some algorithms, and figure out where the gaps are, and go seek out answers to those gaps, which would then allow us to make an assessment much quicker. So we need to stop the threats, the Snowdens, the Mannings. So we knew this was not going to be easy for us. Data is our biggest challenge. We don't have an ERP system of security. And one of the things I learned being in the ERP business was the power of the ERP was forcing at data entry consistency of the data, so you had something you could rely on and use for business intelligence, dashboarding, and all those things. And now today, AI, as we've seen through some of the wonderful examples in the speeches you've heard earlier. So how are we going to do the basic things we know, labeling? And this came out recently. Remember, we've been on this journey a couple years before this, but it really validated our thinking. We needed to have a way to do all these things, especially labeling the data. But remember, the data is on paper or at best PDFs. And that data that we really need lives in the general note field at the bottom. That complicates things. We needed a tool. We knew it before this policy came out. This just reinforced it. We had to have a platform that allowed us to fix this problem so that as we really understood what the data was telling us, we could really take advantage of the machine learning models. So we looked out there back in 2018, and no kidding, I had this reaction. It was like, oh my God, there were plenty of tools. Which one do you choose? So I realized very quickly with some of the team in our experiences with software development, there's almost a religious debate about which tool to use. And in the Department of Defense, we buy in a very interesting process that some of you may be familiar with, which doesn't necessarily allow us a simple way of consolidating down, because everybody who comes in to do work with us says, hey, I can do it for that price, but I got to bring my tools. Great. There's another tool we got to deal with. So we knew we not only needed a platform, but we needed one that was very flexible, because we never know where we're going to be pushed with other tools that have to be in the environment. And I think as you've seen with C3, that was the eye-opener. It was, wow, here's a tool that is thinking completely different, not trying to force us down a direction, but allowing us to be able to plug in whatever we felt were the right tools for today to augment the capabilities we really need for the long term, and we knew they would change. So being someone who grew up in the military and came out, leadership's always been one of those things I'm fascinated by. One of my favorites is John Wooden, coach of the UCLA Bruins basketball team, and I find this so critical to what we're doing. Put your socks on correctly. We can't afford a delay. We can't afford to be wrong because we didn't put our socks on correctly in the middle of the game. While I want to find that Snowden so bad, imagine you're not Snowden and the algorithm identifies you and says, you can't have a clearance. I've affected your life. We can't do that. We have to do the basics really, really well. Back to the data problem. Being a math guy and a computer scientist, I said, how many data sources do we need to connect? And how do we do that in the Department of Defense? Well, point to point is like a favorite word. I didn't think point to point was a good way to go. It scared me. 9 months to get a legal agreement in place through the lawyers, 9 months at best to get through all the cybersecurity checks to be able to open up all the ports through the crazy network that we live on to safely and securely get data from point A to point B or have access to data at point B. So in a simple example, remember that time, 4 nodes, 6 paths. Yeah, makes sense. 25 nodes, no big deal, 300 paths. What about an agency, 14,000 people, that has a desire to have, well, we have about 38 systems. Let's say on average in the future we're going to have 15 data sources. Wow. I don't think we can survive with point to point. We have to change. I talked about the 4 missions, there they are, and each one wanted to connect to different data sources. We have a mess. We can't live this way in the future if we're going to really seriously take on artificial intelligence and use it effectively in our missions. So fortunately, as with everything I've found in the Department of Defense, there's always innovation and there's always somebody thinking the same way you are. You just have to find them and band together and really use that to break through the frozen middle. Those people that say, nah, I don't want to do that. Why? Because the way we fund programs, we assign one person, say, you're the program manager, here's your money, here's your requirement, Negotiate with your stakeholder time or scope, how many features are in it, and money. Those are your three variables. Well, that's a simple triangle. I tell the customers when I was a PM, you can choose two, I get to decide the third. So if you want it faster with more stuff in it, it's going to cost you more. Pretty simple equation. Well, we give money to a program and we say, go build this really cool thing. And they go out and they find a cloud computing capability, they find a cloud platform, they figure out what they're going to do for data if they're that sophisticated, and they build a mission application. So I assign the next program manager. What do? They do the same thing. We got to stop this. This is crazy. But to buy in the middle and buy an enterprise capability that every program will use is hard in the DoD. It goes against the way our processes are designed. Our processes were designed to protect us from making mistakes, buying $1 million hammer, right? The old joke. We can do this. We can buy enterprise capabilities. We have the processes. We have the rules and regulations that allow us to do it. We have to want to do it. So how do I convince people to want to build a platform that does all this across the enterprise? So first thing we did was we established the cloud capabilities, the platforms, and then we said, we need a shared AI and data services platform that everybody can use, and we put that in and say, if you want to work with us on mission A, industrial security, or insider threat, or personnel security, come on in, but you're going to use our platform. Because it's connected already to our data, and I'm going to get into what that means. So of course, that went okay, until some of the people doing development in the DevOps model came in and said, well, what do we need another platform for? We do DevOps. We have a pipeline. We're good at it. It's secure. I'm telling you, DevOps is not MLOps. And convincing people that is still a challenge for us. Because they don't understand that you're managing and deploying models at a frequency that far exceeds what you're doing to write a workflow tool for how organization wants to send information from person A to person B to person C to get somebody to make a decision. It's pretty static. It doesn't change that much once you have it built. This is about experimentation, building a sandbox. We got to learn what our data is telling us. We had 12 years of experience in doing research in artificial intelligence through our partners in the Army on the West Coast that had figured out algorithms that could predict change in human behavior that would be interesting for our missions. 12 years of research invested. How much of that do you think was on a production system when I got there in 2018? Zero. Why? Because we handed them the data on a thumb drive. You heard our Forrester colleague talk yesterday about we built government-owned platforms to control and manage that data, to meet the security requirements, to meet the authority, the use, all those policy things. We built our own tool. So when I went in as the guy that owns the development teams and said, yeah, I want to bring that over, let's take a look at how we test it and get it approved, there was no easy way to do that. We didn't even have the same data. They manipulated the data. Why? Because of their rules. When you do human subject studies in the federal government, you cannot do certain things. You cannot use my age. You can only use an age range, 50 to 59. So how do we give them the data and not have them ruin it so that we can use it against the production data and still let them experiment? We need a platform. We need a way to do that directly with the data. So remember, most of the data we had at this early stage was on paper or PDF, or don't laugh, there was a room full of microfiche. Yes. So we knew we had a problem because getting all that data amassed is going to be really hard, and it's going to eat up a lot of time and money, and we don't have either. So we actually said, instead of focusing on what we had been doing through the Army on the mission outcome use of artificial intelligence, we focused on how can we use it to help us find our data, parse our data, interpret our data, label our data, really get after that. And that's what we went after really hard for the last 2 years. First step, in keeping with responsible AI, the law tells us, and policy, the what and how, right? We have specific rules on data. Within a single mission, there are subsets of data that can only be used by certain users. Think law enforcement, think insider threat, think medical. All of these rules apply to our data across different sets and different cross-sections. So we had to come up with some way of building a common metadata standard where none existed. So we were in the process, I remember we went through this merger, we didn't have a chief data officer, we established one, we built a process, we defined it, went in and partnered with them and came up with a labeling standard for governance and indexing. We had over 200 labels. It sounds like a lot. I think it is, but I think we don't know enough to make it any better. So we really looked at how all these overlapping things like security, authority, stewardship, indexing, where's the data, what's its life, what's its classification level? Did I mention that we actually need to operate on 5 networks? Public internet, partners that are unclassified, unclassified, secret, and top secret. And our mission doesn't operate on one of those networks, it operates on all of them simultaneously. So business processes, mission processes to move data around require us in real time to have to transcend up and down these networks. That's hard in the Department of Defense, very hard. But we knew by doing this labeling correctly, we could help break some glass here on how do you move data down from classified networks to unclassified networks, which is the hardest problem. And do it in an automated way in real time with the mission workflows. So you can see there's a couple problems coming at us at once. It wasn't just, hey, let's just go implement AI, we have good data, we need a way to do that smartly. We were trying to do ourselves a whole bunch of challenges at the infrastructure layer too. So data as a service is really where we focus, and then putting in some processes around the DOAI principles. We did a quick look at our data visualization. This is just one small, tiny system. And then what we really focused on with the use of C3 and the tools was how do we transform that data not only into the objects, but then put them into that governance process of the object. And this gets into kind of the value proposition we saw right away with C3, which is that ability to abstract the use of data to an object independent of where it's coming from in the data source. Leave the data near the transactional system where it was created. We didn't want to move it. The less we move data, the less risk we have, especially given the sensitivity of some of that data. So we created objects, and what we found was, because we were a little bit zealous with the data labeling, some of the things we could do with just the labels. They were powerful enough and enrich enough to really help us do some things. So in this idea of transforming the data, we ran it through the models, we created the objects, and then we coined something, my colleague Mark Niemer here coined this phrase to help us market the term of machine as a teammate. Why? Because there's a lot of fear out there. What are you going to use AI for? Is it going to make a decision? We can't do that. That's scary. We're okay. So we use this machine as a teammate label brand to really help people understand we're using it to help a human make a decision faster and better. Then we kind of laid out from that the visualization, came up with some graphs of that. Again, on the left side was really just a simple way to show there's a whole bunch of different classes of objects within our data set. And then how do we really get that to an actual visualization coming out of the tool? So we ingested, this is one of the pilots that we did that we're looking to really move into a more operational environment next fiscal year with some new money coming in. Remember, we get money in 2 years in advance. We have to plan it 2 years ahead to get that money. So we're getting ready for this next one in industrial security. We ingested commercial data and some organic data. We transformed that. We tagged it, labeled it, put our AI identifier to look at the linkages. And lo and behold, the data we already had, this little tiny set of data in industrial security identified 3 unknown foreign ownership and influence opportunities that we needed to look at in seconds. Very powerful to help motivate that mission owner to say, I need to partner with you guys. I need more of that. You've heard about the partnership. We've been working on that in the personnel security side for the last 4 years. It's been working well. We're now going to be doing this in the industrial side because of this capability that we were to demonstrate through the visualization and show them what they didn't even know. They missed it. Can't have a Snowden. So what did we learn? 80% of our time was spent on preparing the data and labeling it. And given where our data was and what formats, that's a lot of time. We couldn't do that. So by applying machine learning models to the data transformation piece and the labeling activity, we flipped that model. We had a couple other pilots we had been doing through our partners with the Army where we were looking at quality review of human decisions. Effectively, because it's a labor-intensive process to have humans go look at the work of other humans that took a month or weeks to make by looking through and reading a whole bunch of paper or information on a screen, making the decision of a clearance as an example. We were lucky if we got 1% coverage of our quality review. We got 100% improvement by using machine learning models to do that. And then that informs the training activities to help inform how do we eliminate and make sure we're removing bias from our human decision processes, as well as improving the quality of our reviewers. Anomaly detection. Again, machine as a teammate really helped us by thinking that way. I think, there's other terms that have been used throughout, but for us it was a way of doing something different to get people's attention to say, what is that? And helped us break down the fear factor. But using that model of having machine learning models assist the humans and take out that mundane stuff, help us find the needle in the haystack. Really did increase the velocity, increases identification of new risks, helped us to ensure governance of a very complex set of policies, laws, and regulations that we have to apply to all of our data. And assure when we're doing this at a high level where you're having people look at the output from a model, that they have the right to access that and the authority to use that information because of where it came from through the object structure. So again, we found great success using the platform to help us create that data abstraction layer. Whether you call it a fabric or a mesh, I don't care which term you use. I agree with the earlier speaker on that point. It's like, it doesn't really matter. Do something there where you can federate the data down to where it lives, decide if you want to move the data or not. We prefer to keep it in place and use the platform to abstract that information up for use. That way, when your model does change or the underlying program changes the way that data is architected, all they got to do is redefine the object. You don't have to change all that work you've done on the models. So it's been a great experience. Again, I can't say enough about our partners. They are very bright. The comment about the focus, the laser focus on outcomes and user experience is what we've seen too. And it's been refreshing to have that kind of thought leadership in the room and helping us to think through how do we prevent the next Snowden, Manning, or Hassan. So that's our experience. Again, thank you for your time.